And we've had some thoughts on Lamar. So earlier in the year, we exposed the trash narrative that Lamar can't win a big game. It's been in the media since he first played his first game or got drafted even. He can't win the big game. That was wrong, clearly, throughout the season. And now me and Vish were thinking, we're like, this Ravens team is like really not as special as it's made out to be, especially the offensive talent that they have. So Vish, we think the Ravens need a number one receiver for Lamar. Why?
Yeah, they have to get one. And, I think that the Ravens last year, their roster got completely oversold and overrated. Like, Colin Cowherd had them going 16-0. A lot of people are like, oh, this team is so stacked. But the reality of the situation was they had a lot of holes. Like, losing Ronnie Stanley for the year and Marshall Yanda retiring killed their offensive line.
Yeah.
Their offensive line was nowhere close to as good as what people expected. I think Mark Ingram, like what he brought that first year with Lamar, that year Lamar won the MVP in terms of the power and being able to not play the 7 defensive backs. And that was the first wrinkle to stop the Ravens. I think that helped a lot, but he obviously kind of got hurt and he wasn't really the guy. And J.K. Dobbins kind of became the guy, but I mean, that's not what you're ideally looking for. I at least rookie J.K. Dobbins, like I think J.K. Dobbins has the potential to get a lot better, but he still has to get better. Like overall, the support around Lamar isn't great. Like Andrews is a solid tight end, like we talked about it, like really good player, but
he's not going to take over a game. He can't.
Right,
he single-handedly cannot take over a game.
Right, and then you look at the receiving core, and I think that Hollywood Brown, I don't think is just a fit for what they do. I think I think we can say at this point that was just a bad first round pick, especially because Greg Roman is not a creative pass game coordinator. This has been pointed out by a lot of different people, and it's really true. The Ravens have times where receivers are running into each other's during routes that should never happen, and that's part of what hurts this perception that Lamar Jackson can't throw when he's actually a really, really accurate short to intermediate thrower, especially over the middle of the field, like really accurate. And he's a good decision maker too. So I think that they need to get him a true number one wide receiver, someone with a physical presence on the outside that's going to win. And I know a lot of people think Lamar Jackson can't throw the ball outside, but my question to those people is who was winning outside that he was supposed to throw the ball to? Like Willie Snead, who's now on the Raiders, like solid player, not a number one or a number two receiver. Hollywood Brown has been pretty much using the slot a lot by the Baltimore Ravens because he's too small to win on the outside. And I don't think he's like when he's compared to the speed guys, I think he's that fast. I don't think he's as explosive as a Tyreek Hill or the Deshaun Jackson. So that's how I feel about Hollywood Brown. And then finally, you talk about like Dez Bryant. Is that what he was supposed to rely upon? So I think it's high time, especially given that the Ravens are about to pay Lamar Jackson. Their defense is getting older, especially their defensive line. It's high time they go invest in getting a young, special number one wide receiver and pairing him with Lamar Jackson so that they can be an offensive team in the future because that defense is going to get worse, and that's just how it's going to be. There's not much they can do.
I'm totally with you. And I just wanted to point this out. So there was like a tweet that it was a thread, and basically besides Ronnie Stanley, the next highest paid offensive player for the Ravens is their blocking tight end, Nick Boyle. So he's their second tight end right now. He's a blocker. They took him, I want to say in the first round, or maybe it was the third. They took him and Hayden Hurst in the same draft, 2018.
No, they didn't they take Andrews and Hayden Hurst in the same draft?
It was something like that. They took two tight ends in the same draft.
So they took Andrews and Hayden Hurst both in 2018, which was the year they took Lamar Jackson. They took Hayden Hurst 25, and then they took Nick Boyle has been in Baltimore since 2015. He's been there for a while.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so but he's more of a blocking tight end. They signed Sammy Watkins, but okay. I feel like he lives off of his name so much more than the production that he truly puts up because
he's always hurt.
Yes, he really is. And even on the Chiefs, he'd have a couple games where he'd go off. I know he played well in the Super Bowl, but how many one-off games, like just straight outlier games, did he have where he played well? I think that's the majority of his production, to be honest. Like, it's not a consistent overall representation of who he is as a player. And I don't think he really helps them whatsoever. And to go back to your point on like Dobbins, like, yeah, Dobbins put up some good stats, but their running game is good because of Lamar. I don't think it's that good because J.K. Dobbins is some, top 10 running back. I don't like he's a solid running back, but he's not like the I don't think he has the athletic profile to be like a top 5 or top 8 guy where he can like, take over a game. The only person on this team that can do that is Lamar, but that's asking a lot when he has to be the guy to run to make those plays and pass to make those plays because no one else is really doing that. And so they lost Willie Snead. He was their number 2. He already wasn't the best number 2. Now he's a solid, for what he does, he's solid. But if your best offensive weapon is Mark Andrews, you're going to struggle a lot passing the ball. That's the bottom line.
Right. I mean, that's where I just hate that narrative because they have no receivers of worth. Like, I mean, they have no receivers that are reliable. Like Hollywood Brown also drops a lot of passes.
Yes.
Mark Andrews is reliable, but again, Mark Andrews is a tight end and he's not threatening any defense vertically, so they don't have a vertical threat. And then they have a poorly schemed pass game. And that's where I asked the question, how do you judge Lamar Jackson and say he can't throw? Because we've seen him throw. He's an accurate short to intermediate thrower. He's very accurate over the middle of the field. He's a really good decision maker. He is all of these things, and people blame him. And that's where I think it's high time they go get a receiver in this draft. And unfortunately, they're picking kind of late. So they're going to have to draft one of the guys that they're not going to get a Jamar Chase. They're not going to get Devonta Smith. They're not going to get Jalen Waddle. But whether that guy is Rashad Bateman, whether that guy is Terrace Marshall, whether that guy is Diami Brown, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, whoever that guy is, right? I'm just throwing out everybody. Whoever that guy is, they got to go get him because otherwise, again, like they might make the playoffs next year solely because they have Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
But they don't have, at this point, they don't, especially if Orlando Brown gets traded, they don't have a very good team around Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I didn't really even touch on that either. Like their O-line, if you go back and you think of, okay, like what happened in that Bills game, like there's probably 4 like bad snaps that just either went over his head or just bounced on the line. Their right guard and left guard weren't the best. Now they did bring in Kevin Zeitler, which is like, I think he can provide something there, but Orlando Brown wants to be traded. So basically they're going to have the same O-line as last year. They're losing Matt Skura, they're adding Zeitler, and then they're upgrading from Stanley to Brown. So it's really not that much better. Like I'd say it improved, but not to an extent where you're like, okay, they have a good O-line. And then
it's an okay one.
Yeah, it's okay. Exactly. But like usually that would be aided in having, okay, like we have some weapons on the outside that are going to help alleviate that. They don't have that either. They really just don't have a well-constructed offense, and they get surprised when they'll probably make the playoffs this year and then run into a buzzsaw, and they're going to have to pass 40 times. And
Lamar will take all the blame.
Exactly. It's going to be tough, I think, for the next year or two, depending on how they draft, right? Like they could draft really well and get a good guard or get a good receiver, but it's asking a lot. It really is.
Yeah, and they did draft James Prochet, I want to say, from SMU, and Devin Duvernay from Texas.
Yeah. No, they've drafted guys. They just haven't turned out.
I think Duvernay has a lot of talent, and I know that like James Prochet has shown a couple glimpses of real potential. Mm-hmm. The problem is I don't look at either of those guys and say, "Yay, Lamar Jackson has a true number 1 receiver next year." I look at the best case scenario as, wow, Lamar Jackson has a couple of good receivers, but he needs that go-to target. And I think that's where I think that they need to give Lamar Jackson that. Like at some point, like they've kind of built this team and they built it for last year and it did not go well last year. No. And they're in this weird spot where they got these older, highly paid guys. They're not true cap flexible, and they haven't like they hit certain positions, right? Every year they get these outside linebackers.
Yes.
One leaves in free agency, like Zadarius Smith leaves. Okay, we have our next guy. Tyus Bowser is the new guy, right? They just do this kind of thing
They
with the
recycle it, yeah, and they always figure
right, right, right. I think Pernell McPhee was
he's
one before
he
that.
came back. He came back. He's still on
Right.
a team.
So they do draft certain positions well. They've always drafted corner well, but at some point for me and for my money at least, I think that they need to go get a true number one wide receiver for Lamar Jackson. Whether it was this free agency, whether they should have spent money on a Galladay and tried figuring out their cap situation and making that work, or whether it's going and drafting a guy this year, and that guy better be good. You can't draft Hollywood Brown when AJ Brown and Debo Samuel and DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin go after him in the second and third rounds. You have to pick the right guy, and you have to get Lamar Jackson a true number one receiver.
And it's tough because it's not like they haven't tried to. Like they spent a first and then a couple thirds, which is a decent amount of draft capital at receivers. It's just none of them have really panned out to what you would hope for, pretty much. And they've tried in free agency. I mean, they offered Dez a few years ago. They offered him a 3-year deal, and he declined it. I know this offseason they offered T.Y. Hilton, and he didn't. I don't know. It is not looking good for their just overall roster and how it is constructed. And do you remember the Calais Campbell thing, how everyone was like, oh, the Ravens, fleeced the Jags because they traded a fifth to get. And he is really good. He did get injured, but he's also getting paid over $15 million.
And he's 34.
Exactly. So maybe there was a reason he wasn't valued as much as we think he is.
Yes, I agree. And at some point, like you have to look at context with this Lamar Jackson situation. I don't understand why nobody looks at context with him, right? Like Pat Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL, one of the greatest talents. He has Travis Kelce, he has Tyreek Hill, he has Andy Reid scheming up the pass game. Aaron Rodgers, Matt LaFleur, they have a really good offense running RPOs and a bunch of stuff. And Devontae Adams is a true number one wide receiver.
And they have a
Josh
great
Allen,
line.
right? Josh Allen, Brian Daboll, Stephon Diggs, Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, and Brian Schottenheimer was a good run game coordinator. Not the best pass game coordinator. I think Russell Wilson also hurts them a little bit in the pass game. But again, DK Metcalf, true number one wide receiver, right? And Lockett's probably better than any receiver on the Ravens.
Easily.
Even like guys like Dak Prescott, not the best pass game with McCarthy, and okay with Kellen, what's the Boise State quarterback, Kellen Moore, excuse me. And I've been forgetting a lot of names today, my God. But you have Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, right? All these young quarterbacks have legit weapons, or like these quarterbacks have legit weapons on the outside. And then you look at Lamar Jackson and you say, Greg Roman scheming up the pass game. And if you're ranking like just scheming up the pass game in terms of coordinators in the NFL, Greg Roman's easily a bottom 5 coordinator at doing that. Niners fans know this better than anybody. His pass game is pedestrian. His run game is elite. But when you look at that, and then you start saying, who are his receivers on the outside? Hollywood Brown, Willie Snead. Like, these are not bad players. They're okay ones. They're good ones. But there's no name on the outside where teams, okay, we have to worry about Lamar. We have to worry about this run game. But we also have to worry about Hollywood Brown beating us for 8 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the outside. There's nobody like that scares you on this offense. And that's where I think you nailed it. When you talked about it earlier, you talked about the fact that, hey, look, there's only one player on this offense that can take over a game, and that's Lamar Jackson. And to me, that's a problem. You need somebody else that could. Otherwise, Lamar Jackson can't play elite perfect for 17 games.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
You're just asking for the impossible, and you can't expect that of any quarterback. It's bound to happen. If that's your only contingency to win, you're gonna make the playoffs and then just get waxed like that. Like it's not a Super Bowl winning recipe, bottom line.
And I still think there's questions about their defense, because if Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell, Derek Wolfe all were hurt at different points last year, especially Williams and Campbell. I think that especially if Williams misses games, I think their run defense is suspect. I know Patrick Queen was a rookie last year, and he did some really great things. He also did some not so great things. But I think the run defense from that standpoint is a little suspect. That's why Wink Martindale has to blitz so much. And yeah, their corners are amazing and their safeties are pretty good, but man, I have a little bit of questions about their front seven. I don't think this is a stacked roster. I really don't. I
Yeah,
think there are names on this roster, but I think when you go in the entire totality of it, I think people are really underestimating how good Lamar Jackson has been the last 2 years and how good he really is in terms of elevating all these people around him.
I'm with you. And especially I think the Coward thing is the funny thing. So they went 14-2, and on paper their roster got better, but they did lose a key few guys, and then the injuries obviously hit them pretty bad. Stanley, a lot of their defense. So their roster really is not as good as advertised at the end of the day.
Right. And the offensive line thing, like their line will get better, right? Zeitler
Yeah.
will now be an adequate replacement for Yanda, who I think hurt them. His loss hurt them a ton. And then Ronnie Stanley is as good as any left tackle in the NFL, not named Trent Williams or David Bakhtiari, in my opinion. So him coming back will be massive. But is that going to be enough?
No.
Like, you can protect Lamar Jackson. He still needs somewhere to throw the football to.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. So I think that wraps that up. But I think bottom line here is me and you agree they need something on the outside that resembles a number one receiver, and that their roster maybe is not as good as it may appear from how you hear it talked about in the media.